Miami Dolphins general manager Chris Grier spoke to the media on Tuesday ahead of the 2025 NFL draft, and as you'd expect, everyone's taking it swell.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, we are reacting to the Tuesday, April 25th Chris Grier press conference that has the whole world up in a tizzy, as is the case usually with anything that Chris says or does. There was a funny message that Chris received from the fan base that he shared during this press availability. There were some messages sent to some players. There was some clues as the Dolphins draft intentions that was included in this as well. And of course, a lot around the Jalen Ramsey saga, which has developed this week into confirmed both the Dolphins and Ramsey looking to go their separate ways. So let's start with messages sent. And I think the most clear and obvious message that was sent throughout the course of this press conference, and look, everybody has their opinion of Chris Grier. He has plenty of detractors. There are plenty of people that are ready to punt on 2025 because of the existence of Chris Grier in the building. Okay, you feel whatever you want. I'm not going to make it about the emotion or the instinct of what you feel, the intuition of what you have about what the Dolphins' outlook is with Chris entering into this draft. I'm going to more so keep it about what was said and the messages that it sends. Okay. Let's start with Cam Smith, cornerback. Obviously was a marquee player in the Dolphins draft class in 2023. Was the second round draft choice, the face of the class. We've seen next to nothing of Cam Smith through 2 seasons. And with the Jalen Ramsey trade rumor, Chris Grier was asked about Kader Kohou, and you know, he said Kader's been a Swiss Army knife for us to play inside and outside. But Cam Smith, quote, needs to come through at the end of the day. He's got to stay healthy. We can't hold his hand and wait for him anymore. For all of the things that Chris Grier said that you probably didn't like throughout the course of that press conference, I appreciate this one. I appreciate a direct message through the press to a player who the team has a significant investment in, and that player has not been able to stay healthy. And some of that is in your control, and some of that is not in your control. But for a player like Cam Smith, who has come in and been lapped by UDFAs in consecutive seasons with Anthony Weaver and Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator, there's clearly something that's not clicking here. And me personally, like, I'm not holding my breath for anything from Cam. I'm really not. But this is probably the kind of season upcoming for the Dolphins where a lot of players that are young players that were either drafted in 2025 or 2024, 2023, whether they are ready or not, are going to play and going to play a lot of football. And for Cam Smith, the least you can do is take this offseason serious, get your body in the right kind of shape, be mentally prepared with the same system back-to-back seasons, come in and earn the right to have some snaps early and play and let the chips fall where they may. Because we can't hold his hand and wait for him anymore is a really damning statement as it pertains to what Cam Smith's experience has been as 2 years of a member of the Miami Dolphins. You're going into year 3, brother. You don't want to get off the pot time. As far as if it's going to happen for you as a player, specifically here in Miami, it's going to have to happen now. And I appreciate that from Chris Grier, and I think that's true. And it's not a great reflection of the draft choice of Cam Smith. And Chris Grier asked about, the players that he's drafting and says we're looking for NFL-ready players. We have to get the character and the person element of it right. That was at a separate point in the conversation where he's not talking about Cam Smith, but he might as well have been. Where, very clearly a second-round pick that's as talented as Cam Smith is, that falls out of favor with two separate defensive coordinators in back-to-back seasons in his first and second year in the league. There's something else going on here, right? But that statement from Chris Grier about looking for NFL-ready players, I think is another message to what, and this roster is going to have a lot of turnover from veteran players that you know what you have to young players that you don't. And that's a message to me as somebody on the outside looking in, figuring out how they're going to piece together this roster. They're talking about some of their personnel decisions have been dictated by where they feel this class is strong and where they can invest draft capital. They're kind of hinting at, well, we're going to take opportunities throughout this draft to draft and fill some of these needs on the roster. That's always a tricky proposition, and I'll be fascinated to see how much they lean on either end of the pole into drafting for need or drafting for just talent at maybe a position that they don't need early. But their messaging is such that we are going to draft players that are ready to play and can contribute in 2025. You take that with the message that was sent about Patrick Paul. Chris Grier said Patrick Paul is going to be our left tackle this year, and we'll have the first crack at it. He alluded afterwards to how they like Larry Borom for the traits that he brings to the table. And I think there's a chance Larry Borom can compete for a starting job with Miami with the current depth chart, what it is. I'd love to get more draft picks so that you could draft the guard on day 2 that you feel like can win that starting job and keep Larry Borom as a depth player. But that's kind of my expectation with the draft class and last year's draft class. Malik Washington's going to play a lot. Jalen Wright's going to play a lot more with Jeff Wilson gone and with Raheem Mostert gone. Patrick Paul's going to be the starting left tackle. Chop Robinson's obviously played a lot of football this past year and is going to play more. And who they draft in the first, second, third, and probably fourth round with those first 5 picks in the top 135 when it's all said and done, those guys are probably going to play a lot of football too. Cam Smith, it's up to you to make sure you're on the list, dude. Message received. Dolphins, quote, can't hold his hand and wait for him anymore. Now, some draft intentions as far as some certain spots that they've alluded to, their psychology going into the draft. We're going to get into that from Chris Grier next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you guys stick with us. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep hiring insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So, draft intentions for the Dolphins. And obviously, you're keeping this relatively close to the vest. You don't want to give away your battle plans, if you will, going into a draft where you're trying to out-leverage and outmaneuver other teams to draft your targets and players. But they kind of did allude to, I would say, the secondary. And Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald has had some reporting as of late suggesting that the team is eager to add to the secondary through this draft class. And the defensive tackle, between the combine availability and other interviews and reports that have come out throughout this process, and then what Chris Grier said about the draft class kind of dictating the defensive tackle or some of the personnel moves and decision-making process that they've had leading to this point, those are two spots where I would kind of expect to see the Dolphins be prepared to potentially double dip at both spots. Now, we have Cam Smith, you have Kader Kohou, you have Storm Duck, who played meaningful football for you at times last year and showcased potential, but a lot of youth and inexperience. I would say right now, the betting favorite for what the Dolphins do at 13 should be a defensive back. Now, Chris Grier was asked about the safety position and said he did feel good about their situation at safety, but they will look to continue to add to the position's depth. Now, you can improve the depth by getting a starter and knocking everybody down a peg, or you could potentially improve the depth by bringing in a defensive back like a Jahdae Barron from Texas, who has the ability to play some safety and some nickel for you and kind of blur the lines between a corner and a DB. I think about Kader Kohou and what Chris Grier said about him kind of serving as a Swiss Army knife. And I think a lot of that is applicable with Kader Kohou as well, where he's in the slot or he's outside and he inverts and he's playing deep half coverages. Like the diversity of what they have in the secondary, I think if you add more players and pieces like that, and there's a number of safety nickel hybrids, Jordan Hancock from Ohio State, Marquez Siegel from Kansas State, couple of names that aren't just marquee top of draft like a Malachi Starks or a Nicky Manwari, but of course those players can be a part of the solution for you as well. Ultimately, it ends up, I think, being dictated upon where you draft. And Chris teased this a little bit. He teased the concept that picking at 13 and managed to throw in if we stay there. I think it's far more likely with the needs that the Dolphins have, with the challenges that the team faces in stocking some of the rooms and having enough picks to kind of double dip where you might want to double dip and where there's talent available to double dip, but not leave yourself hanging or feel like you're pressed to draft early and draft for need. You're going to need more than 10 picks to achieve that. And I have it on fairly good confidence level that in a perfect world, Miami would have more day 2 draft capital. And whether that comes via moving down from 13 or whether that comes via a part of a Jalen Ramsey trade, whether that includes day 3 picks comboed with Ramsey to go up, or if you manage to get a team to organically give you probably what I would assume would be a late day 2 pick. I wouldn't expect you would get that straight up for Jalen Ramsey at this stage in his career. But Chris Grier managing to throw that teaser in there of if we stick and pick at this juncture, we feel good about our chance to get a good player there. Now, he was asked about the quarterback position. He did throw some cold water on the question about drafting a quarterback in the first round, but did not, he's effectively said we have our starting quarterback. I wouldn't rule anything out, but we're not looking to take a quarterback in the first round. So the Shedeur Sanders type situation, I think even if he's there at 13, I don't know that that's necessarily the type of hypothetical that would pull the Dolphins off of their current stance and take another quarterback, even though I think Sanders is the best kind of stylistic fit. As we got a little into, what was it, yesterday on the show, talking about drafting a quarterback, on Monday on the show, we talked about, how there's a point and an intersection where the risk and the reward and the value and the expectation for a pick at that range of the draft, that can all align where it would make sense for the Dolphins draft a quarterback in 13 in this year's class. Doesn't really feel like it's aligned. I want to get into the Jalen Ramsey. I guess you could call it a saga, if you will, because Chris he avoided throwing Jalen under the bus. We'll see if there's anything else that comes out from Ramsey's side of things before ultimately they find a deal and expectations on what a deal looks like. He was kind of mum on that. But the last story that Chris shared that I got a good laugh out of, and I think everybody that was there in the media room did as well. He's talking about the fans and the pressure to win and how he understands and he knows how it's a part of the job when you don't meet expectations. There's going to be a lot of calls for your job or whatever. And he talked about how he got this package to the house, and it was a really nice letter from a fan voicing their support with a T-shirt that says, "Don't F this up" on the shirt. And Chris said he hung it up in his office, which is a fun little image to paint as far as Chris, at his home office or at the stadium or whatever it is. And he's working away and trying to figure out a winning game plan and getting the Dolphins back on track. And every once in a while, he just looks up and this fan's t-shirt with "Don't F this up" is hanging up on the wall. So I might get one for myself and put it up on the wall here somewhere as well. Not the family program. I can't put it up on the background, but at the very least I can have it somewhere off to the side where maybe I can see it. Now, I want to talk about the Jalen Ramsey stuff that Chris Grier dished on. We're going to talk about that next year on Locked On Dolphins, so make sure you guys stick with us. The NBA playoffs are just about here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on all of the action right now. When you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. FanDuel makes it super easy to bet, whether you're picking on the Heat to win in the play-in series or if you're diving into individual player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways that you can bet your favorite player props. Plus, when the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Do not miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So the Jalen Ramsey stuff. Chris kind of said that Jalen didn't request a trade, but in conversations with Jalen and his representation, who he didn't mention by name, but it's David Mulligetta, who's the red-hot agent across the league right now, was part of facilitating Jalen coming to Miami in the first place. And, of course, getting a contract and then getting a new contract a year after getting a new contract. He got a new contract 12 months after that, or I guess 18 months after that, closer to 18 months. He did come out and say, it was mutually agreed upon to be a decision that Ramsey and the Dolphins, go their separate ways. Now, he didn't come straight out and say that Jalen Ramsey is going to be dealt. He said, sometimes these trades can take time. They sometimes come together during the draft. Sometimes they take a longer process than that. He kind of declined to say whether he would be optimistic if Ramsey was here in 2025 or not. But he did manage to say, we're prepared. If he's here, we'll deal with it. If he's not, we'll adjust, which is very non-committal. I would hope at this stage, if it's gotten to this point, that he's not here. And, for all of the emotional attachment to an elite player like what Jalen Ramsey is, and he's still playing at an elite level, right? This team's operating on a short-term or on a long-term scope and view. And if you're going to operate on a long-term scope and view, it is better, in my opinion, to move on from the soon-to-be 31-year-old corner making $25 million this season and get what you can. If you're operating with a long-term view, it is always, in my opinion, better to move on a year too early than a year too late. And if you're going to take your bad medicine and you're going to take the lumps of moving on from Teron Armstead's retirement and Calais Campbell going back to Arizona, and Chris said that they did make an offer to Calais. He opted to go back to Arizona. It's been reported in some places that Arizona's offer was up to 3 times as much money. So as much as I know some want to make this vast departure of veteran players some kind of indictment on Mike McDaniel, Mike's got his issues, right? And the team's not all sunshine and rainbows right now because they didn't win last year. Winning's a cure-all for everything, and when you don't win to the degree in which everybody expects and wants to win, the negativity and the malcontent of everything is going to be front row center. You're going to hear a lot more of it, right? But Teron Armstead needing a knee replacement and Calais Campbell taking 3 times as much money to go play in Arizona is not an indictment of the Dolphins in any capacity in my mind. And for Jalen Ramsey, that Jalen just did the same thing to the Rams. And guess what? The Rams figured it out and worked through it. And I'm not guaranteeing you that the Dolphins are going to figure it out and work through it, and they're going to make the playoffs through that transitional window. I can't promise that. And I won't promise that because there's a lot of different ways this season can go. And many of them, as so many of you are quick to point out in the comments, many of them are not good. But I do think if you remove the emotional attachment and the emotional investment that you have in the Dolphins' success from the equation, I do think moving on from Jalen Ramsey with what the offseason focus is the right move to make. So with that in mind, I hope they don't wake up on game day, week 1, and Jalen Ramsey's on the roster and they have to quote unquote deal with it. You shouldn't. You get what you can. Now the challenge is you need to maximize the potential, and you might have to get creative there to get what you feel is tangible value. I don't think this is send Jalen Ramsey out and get 2 draft picks back of meaningful significance. I don't think he's at that stage of his career. And even though there's very low salary cap ramifications for the team bringing him on for 2025, I just think the cash and the age and the risk and the potential to be a one and done is all a recipe that leads to Miami not cashing in big. But if I were the Dolphins, I would be taking the offers that can move the needle for me next weekend. That would be my goal. We'll see what the Dolphins ultimately do. That's going to do it for us here today on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. You can keep it locked in here. Locked On Dolphins. We'll be back again soon with more Miami Dolphins coverage coming your way. Go Fins.